All right. Hello, everybody. Joshua Hatton here with ImpEx Beverages, but also today, Joshua Hatton here with Single Cast Nation as well. I'm wearing two hats. Somehow, I'm fitting it atop this nest of brown spiders on my head. Um, Today is the fifth and final in our ImpEx Distillery Deep Dive series, at least for spring of 2021. Who knows what winter of 2021 might bring us. I don't know if I just got myself into trouble there and forced work onto myself, but hey ho. Today's episode is focusing on something that is incredibly near and dear to my heart, and that is independent bottling and independent bottlers. This is where my passion has laid for many a year. I loved it so much I decided to start a company, an independent bottling company with I'm gonna bring this gentleman on here with Jason Johnston-Yellin. How are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Joshua Hatton?
I'm doing well. Normally, I bring Sam and Chris on first because they are really the guests of honor. But because I'm wearing two hats, I decided to change it up a little bit. But let me introduce Mr. Filmus and Mr. Uhde. How are you, gentlemen?
We're good, thank you.
Oh, it's going to be a night. Okay. So as always, we have Chris and Sam on here, and they often lend some wonderful questions to the conversation, wonderful insight. But I'm going to be posing some questions to them as well. And then finally, we've got three lovely people from Elixir Distillers. If you're not familiar with the name Elixir Distillers, they are the company that's behind Port Askaig, Single Malts of Scotland, both of which are imported into the US, but you may also be familiar with Elements of Islay. You may be familiar with the distillery that they're going to be building on Islay soon. I'm sure many of you have heard about that. So we've got the lovely Ollie Chilton. Good, sir.
Before we go any further, can I just point out when you took us all off screen, you said there was no favoritism. There was favoritism, right? There's just putting it out there. Okay.
You simmer down over there in London. Simmer down.
Yeah.
Get yourself in check.
Well, I saved the absolute best for last. I've got Chanel Liquori and Julie Hamilton. How are you both doing?
Good, thanks, John.
Good, thank you.
We're the favorites. Did you get that, Ollie?
You are the favorites. See that?
Wondering if you.
Middle child. I'm very used to it.
So thank you all so much, especially Chanel, Julie, and Ollie for calling in. I think it's around 1:30 your time. So it's tomorrow your time. You're calling in from the future. So we really appreciate you doing that. And Julie, I don't get to see you enough. It's funny, before we started this, I thought that you may have been on Islay, and I was thinking about the time that you, me, Ollie, and Jason were somewhere near Lagavulin and drinking into all hours of the night.
Yeah,
that was a fun memory. So today's topic, independent bottling. So it's kind of obvious why you're here, and I've sent you all a question ahead of time that hopefully you've read, hopefully you've pondered. And if you're anything like my business partner, Jason, you've done no such thing, because that's just not the way he works.
Lightning in a bottle, Joshua. Lightning in a bottle.
Lightning in a bottle. So here's my question for you to get the conversation going. And there's a bit of a setup here. So typically speaking, the category of independently bottled whiskey has been a lesser known category within the spirits category overall. A lot of people are confused by the idea of independently bottled whiskey. Like, why would a distillery sell an independent bottler? They're good casks. They must be selling them their bad casks, right? Like, how do the independent bottlers even get access to these whiskeys? And then this is a really good one. I was in a tasting one time, and someone was telling me a story about this counterfeit Macallan that they saw, and they couldn't believe that a store was selling counterfeit Macallan. I said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, it said Spey malt on it. Like Gordon MacPhail Spey malt. Yeah, that's it. They're faking a Macallan." And I had to explain to him what that was, right? So that's another some people's understanding or lack of understanding of independent bottlers. So there's your setup. In recent years, however, the American bourbon industry has put a major focus on single barrel picks for stores, for clubs, for groups, etc. As the trend grows, it's good for brands, it's good for consumers, but it seems to be confusing even more the already misunderstood category of independent bottler, right? Is the group who picked that barrel of wild turkey, are they a group of independent bottlers? There are some that may say we're independent bottlers because we picked this cask. So one would say, well, if you pick a cask, are you an independent bottler? So these are the things that I want us to think about. And I also want to touch on the thought of why independent bottlers are so important to the industry. So let's start off with the second one, with the bourbon. And I don't know if this is happening so much in the UK, but here in the US, you can't go into a good whiskey shop without seeing some really fine whiskey picks, whether it's a 4-row single barrel, a Buffalo Trace barrel, Eagle Rare, you name it, and they're all really good stuff, right? Does that confuse what independent bottling is? And if you think it does, how can we educate those to think otherwise? Who should I start with? There you go, Ollie, the brave one.
So it is happening in the UK and Europe and whatever, and it's happened for quite a few years, although not so much with bourbon specifically. In fact, in the UK, it's impossible to get lots of selections of single barrel bourbon. That's just kind of kicking off really in the last few years. But you've had kind of own bottling, so distillery bottling, single cask picks for shops for quite a few years. And I remember we started, well, when I was with Whiskey Exchange, we've had them going back probably about 20 years-ish, including, like, if you go back, quite crazy stuff, like you could get single cask Hakushu. That was pretty mad for peanuts, and, you know, et cetera. Personally, I don't find it particularly confusing. I guess that distinction between shop and independent bottler is kind of a funny one, although historically speaking, independent bottlers were shops. So I'm currently drinking something from Gordon MacPhail. Gordon MacPhail were a shop in Elgin, and the other kind of oldest independent bottling names are Cadenheads of Aberdeen, originally of Aberdeen, now of Campbelltown, but the original shop was in Aberdeen, and they originally did rum, actually single cask rum from their shop. And then Berry Brothers and Red of London, their shop's still in London, it's still there, it's still the same shop. And that's what they did. They chose casks and they sold them to their customers. I guess the bit that we fit into now, and you guys fit into in Single Cask Nation, is that more the kind of Italian model that came around the 60s and 70s, where these guys from Italy were importing casks from Cadenheads and from Gordon MacPhail and putting their own name and their own stamp of approval. So, and this kind of leaches into the start of your question of independent bottlers and what they're good for. I kind of see it that, you know, your job as an independent bottler is to put a stamp of approval. Now, whether a shop's doing that or whether we're doing that, or, you know, whoever, you know, whether it's ImpEx buying something and saying like this is an exclusive for the US from Kilhoman, they're putting their stamp of approval. And all that does is give the customer someone else to look at and say, well, if these guys think it's good, then it's good. As long as you're doing a good job, obviously.
So I don't mean to interrupt you here, but just really quickly, thinking about independent bottlers and independent bottling and really how important it is. And again, we'll touch on that. If a store gives their stamp of approval or a group gives their stamp of approval, is that better than what independent bottlers do? Is it separate from? Does it detract from what the bottlers are doing with their own stamp of approval, the reason that they bottled it?
I think it's the same. It's exactly the same. The only thing is you as a customer and who you learn to trust. So you trust, well, I trust the people that I like what they bottle, right? So whether that's an independent bottler or a shop. So there's certain shops, as an example, in the UK, we've got Royal Mile whiskies. I like Arthur Motley a lot. If Arthur thinks it's a good bottle of whiskey, then there's a good chance I'm going to like what he's chosen. So as a retailer, if they bottle something, there's a good chance I'll buy from them. In terms of independent bottlers, I'm a big fan of Adelphi, big fan of Thompson Brothers. If these guys have said it's good, then there's a good chance I'll like it, so I'll go and buy a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's about that education of who you are and why people should trust you, and that's frankly just down to boots on the ground. And again, it's as a smaller business, you can do that. We can open bottles and we can share. We can talk about individual casks, and we've got lovely people like Julie and Chanel who can do that much better than I do. It's their turn now. It's
Buttering us up.
Speaking of stamps of approval, and Chanel, it looks like you wanted to say something. I just wanted to show this really quickly. This was what I'm drinking right now. I don't know if you could see it. There we go. So this was a cask of Tormore that we absolutely loved, and we offered it up to JVS, which is the Sam and Chris's distribution company for California, and they liked it so much they said that this should be an exclusive to JVS, right? And so this is one stamp of approval 1, and then stamp of approval 2. So I guess there is that importance of compounding stamps of approval. Did I cut you off before, Chanel?
No, not at all. Not at all, mate. I because when you sent us the questions, especially that question, right?
Yeah.
I honestly thought, I'm like, well, no, it is different. It is different. Those are private customers. That's a completely different look. And then I thought, well, how is it different? And in what way would you define an independent bottler to? And I did not come up with anything. So I feel more confident hearing what Ollie has to say in terms of, stamps of approval and in the general process of things. It's fairly similar. And it is about trust, and it is, there's some great people doing barrel picks. Mm-hmm. I'd pick up a couple for sure.
Well, I think that the getting into it is another is a separate component. In other words, how many thousands of casks are you guys potentially sitting on because you have established businesses that you need to feed, right? It goes beyond a barrel pick. It goes into, well, I need 60 casks at a time to build Port Askaig 110 proof or 100 proof, and I need 60 casks for Port Askaig 8, and so on and so forth. And so do you think, does it, so it goes beyond cask picking and more product creation? Because you could do with that whiskey, now that you've purchased it, whatever you want. You can put it in new wood, you can mature it wherever you want to. So is that another point of difference with independent bottlers as compared to just a single barrel pick for a shop?
I think it can be, but the great thing about independent bottling is it's a pretty broad church, right? You got loads of different styles of businesses and loads of different types of people working in it with loads of different beliefs and understandings. So you do have some businesses who firmly believe that wood is everything. They recask everything they get and they put them into stupid wine casks and hope for the best. You've got some businesses that taste like you guys taste everything before you buy it, right? That I remember speaking to you about that, and that's the luxury we don't take. We buy a much bigger volume, but we don't try everything before we buy it, and then we try it afterwards, and then we try and manage it. And there's lots of different approaches, and none of them are wrong. They're all right. I guess the only bit where it differs from, say, a shop is the shop's buying from a brand. So the brand is obviously saying, well, this is what we want as our house style. This is what we want in our bottle. This is what we want for our brand. When you're an independent bottler, you're inventing the brand. So you can do whatever you like. If maybe you find a Kalila that doesn't taste like Kalila and you decide, well, I love it anymore, I'm going to bottle it. And that's your prerogative. It's your cask. It's what you want to do. So there's a bit more freedom there. But then you still got the flip side of that is you don't have the brand equity. So you've now got to build that with your reputation. And that's probably the work. And that's the bit where people can buy into who you are and what you choose.
Yeah. Well, and that bit that you were saying earlier, Ollie, about the chaps in Italy, right? And knowing the types of products that Samaroli were releasing and knowing that you could get a known distillery, but in a very gentle form of that. And I once heard Samaroli described as an independent bottler of whiskey for wine drinkers. And they weren't being purposely disparaging or maybe even accidentally disparaging, but it was much more, to have a house style while being an independent bottler seems like a hell of an achievement. And aside from, generally speaking, they're known for being good, or generally speaking, they're known for being affordable, to actually have a house style is really quite impressive. And one of the things that Joshua and I have certainly championed from the beginning is mouthfeel. And it's been interesting because in my own journey in exploring and experiencing independent bottlers, I never really thought about mouthfeel with any that I was buying. But in the processes of tasting everything, being responsible for what goes into the bottle, that mouthfeel is absolutely one of our check marks on accepting or rejecting a particular cask. And now with the nation, it's really wonderful that the nation knows to expect unctuous mouthfeel from a single cask nation bottling. And if that by any way, shape, or means becomes part of our house style, I will accept it every day of the week. To be known for that would be quite remarkable.
I've always thought you're quite thick and luxurious, Jason. So
I thought you were going to go for my tongue on that one. I'll accept your comment. It's been so long since we've been in London together.
I backed away because this isn't your podcast, so we've got to be careful.
It is not the podcast. You're correct, sir. That's why I've been quiet for the first 20 minutes or 15 minutes. Can I say one other thing now that I've started talking? This is why I didn't start talking, because I knew I wouldn't stop.
It was really strange how quiet you were, and then I remembered that as soon as you opened the door.
So here's where I always fail, right? I always go into this channeling my inner Sam Filmus. And Sam Filmus is the most present, silent man you will see online. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And so I always say to myself, tonight, I'm going to channel my inner Sam Filmus. And as you've seen, I made it 15 minutes. And then the floodgates opened and then they haven't stopped. So I never successfully pull it off. But
you keep going. I'm going to grab a coffee.
Okay.
I'll make dinner. And
I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to be quiet for another 15 minutes. In asking your question about the store picks, you and I, Joshua Hatton, have had a conversation for a decade now about the difference between bottled by and bottled for.
Yep.
And we have firmly avoided bottled for. And if you're a store and you're heading over to Kentucky and you're going into the Rick House and you're selecting a cask, that is fantastic. It's a wonderful experience. It's a wonderful place to be. When that cask is then bottled, it will be in that distillery's bottle with that distillery's label, and it will say bottled for, name of store, name of club, what have you. It's a fine thing, an absolutely fine thing, and I'm not going to say anything against it. But as an independent bottler, we are bottled by. And that's why it's so important to have our bottle, our label, that consistent story that we're telling as an independent bottler, not engaging in the bottled form model. So that to me is the big difference in where stores aren't independently bottling, even though they are selecting casks.
Oh, I so want to argue with you, but I probably shouldn't.
Oh, go on. Come on.
The floor is yours, Ollie. You want to argue? I'll just pour more whiskey. I'll pop some popcorn.
I guess that my only caveat to that is I think back to when I started in terms of casks, and it was from a retail point of view picking whiskies, and some of them were OBs, some of them were independent bottlings, bottled for the Whiskey Exchange, and it was bottled for the Whiskey Exchange. I was very proud at that time. Now I'm not. Now I care not for what they do. But I was very proud at the time that we built a reputation for our shop that if it had a Whiskey Exchange stamp on it, it was probably the best you were going to get out of that IB. It was probably the best you were going to get out of that distillery at that time. That was our aim. Like basically we had a meeting that we said, right, we don't want to get anything less than 88 points on Whiskey Fun. Every bottling for Whiskey Exchange has to be 88 to 95 points on Whiskey Fun, everything. And if we achieve that, it doesn't matter what we do going forward, it will always get brought up. And that was the aim. I'm not going to lie, we basically took the same aim with Single Malts of Scotland, and it was it was basically, we set a barrier. We said, right, this is what we're looking to achieve in terms of ratings, and in terms of this is our level, this is the benchmark. So from my point of view, the difference between what I do now and what we did then was largely quantity. And yeah, I think Joshua's right in terms of what we do now. We look at longevity and building product, and we take more of a stewardship angle to cask management. Then you can't do that as a shop, right? You can only pick the thing that you're given, from the 5 or 6 things. But I still felt, as a shop, I felt the same sense of ownership and the same sense of pride in looking for.
Oh, sure. Oh, no, and I certainly don't want to suggest otherwise, but as somebody making those store picks, did you consider yourself an independent bottler? Or did you consider yourself someone making selections in a bottled for range?
No, and it's funny, I don't, similar to Chanel, if I actually had to write down what an independent bottler is, I'd really struggle. But I think it's because as I said, there's so many different ways of looking at it, and you've now got businesses like Decadent Drinks, right? He's an independent bottler with his own labels, but he also buys from Signatory and he buys from Highland Park, and almost all of it runs through his shop. So is he a shop or is he an independent bottler? I mean, he's somewhere between. And I think, in a way, what he's doing is probably more true to what G&M Canheads were doing 175, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And because I look at that history of it and that build, I like to think that, you could be a shop and you could become an independent bottler, or you could branch out from just selling to your direct customer base.
But even the way you're using it right now, independent bottler means something, right?
Yeah, I just don't know
even as you're making that move between the two. Welcome back, Julie.
Sorry.
If I could interject real quick.
At this point, I bring in Julie Hamilton, who's worked for the SMWS, has much better understanding.
If I can interject real quick, if you're an American retailer, can you even really curate casks? I mean, it's kind of now you're talking about crossing over the 3 tiers, which that would be extremely difficult to do, I would think.
Oh, interesting. So are you saying you don't think they could? There wouldn't be a tier within there for warehousing casks?
I think it's extremely prohibitive. Like, I think there's a pretty big barrier to entry to that for them to buy futures of casks and then hold on to it in bond while they're a retailer when they're supposed to be buying at wholesale for immediate sale to the consumer.
That's a good point. However, I think there are ways around it. I know there's a shop, a great shop in New Jersey, Bayway Liquors, who've had their own label. Now, my guess is someone is, blind labeling for them. They've picked a cask, they created a brand name and got it labeled for them. I don't think that they likely owned their own cask, right? I think what you're suggesting, Chris, could present problems, but someone could blind label it for them, right?
What do you mean by blind labeling, Josh?
In other words, well, right. If you're a cat food company, there are many different cat food companies that buy from the same place that makes different cat food formulas. Right. They blind label it. This is for you, for your brand, right?
So like an MGP kind of situation.
Yeah. I don't know why I went with cat food. I think MGP is a much better, example.
We're actually moving into various canned products for animals at the moment. But we'll be doing it independently canned, so each can will be different.
So, Ollie, you brought up, or no, I think it was Jason. You brought up an interesting point that I want to ask of Sam and Chris. And so you had talked about the Single Cask Nation house style being texture, right? We're working with multiple distilleries. The flavors are going to run the gamut, but there's always going to be that texture thing. And Compass Box with his blends, you're always going to taste a bit of Klein Leash. That's his house style. With Port Askaig, you have this gentler approach to Islay, this more balanced style of whiskey.
Can I just check, Joshua? Did you just say that John Glazer's house style is Klein Leash? And did you check that with him before saying it? I
am simply stating that I can taste a bit of Klein Leash in a lot of his blends, and he doesn't hide it. That's all I'm saying. And I made the words a bit flowery. I'll admit it. So my question to you, Sam and Chris, and I don't know if you're prepared to answer this, so please tell me to move on. But I don't think I'm stepping out of line here. Later this year, you're going to be introducing your own brand, the ImpEx Collection, and the spirits that you're bottling will run the gamut a bit. And I'm curious from a brand perspective, what are you going to be offering up? What do you envision for the brand, and what do you envision your house style to be?
Joshua, move on. Oops, I'm sorry, you said. First of all, I want to confess that I did not read your message, or the question that you were going to ask. So I'm excused if anything that I said would be off of the right answer. Number two, hi, Julie.
Hi. So sorry. My connection's terrible. I'm so sorry.
I'm gonna have to get a hold of Sakinder so he can buy a little bit better equipment for you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Some few megabytes if he can afford. I don't know.
How awful! I'm sorry.
And then since Joshua, you showed the Stormore 21, we still have customers, our stores that would call once in a while and ask if we have any left. That was an amazing one, and I think that gets to this point that you were saying about stamp of approval. And I want to second Ollie when he said about the quality and the reputation, and to get to that point, I've seen some people coming to the shop and going straight and grabbing the bottle of let's say, single cask nation. Not a good example, but it's just an example, right? Just an example. Just grabbing it. So, but that takes a lot of work, a lot of legwork, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of things, a lot of thoughts to put in there. So the reputation of the brand was so trusty, where people just go and buy it because, oh, what's next? And speaking of stamp of approval, and again, I know that you all hate points and etc. But since Ollie brought some to 88 to whatever points from Serge Valentin, I just got the Whiskey Advocate, and I see Port Askaig 12 years old. Anyone heard of this independent bottler? Port Askaig. I can spell it for you if you like, because my pronunciation. 12 years old, 94 points, and that's the autumn expression, the one that has sherry, and then the regular bourbon expression, the spring, is 92 points. Congratulations to you guys.
It cost us so much money, you have no idea. I had to give one of my children away just to pay for that review.
Well done.
Stop crying. It was me who paid this time. It was my turn to pay. Come on, Ollie. Stay in line. Put yourself in line. So what I'm trying to say with that, it takes a lot of talent, but not only talent that we all know, like Ollie has or Joshua and Jason have, but also a lot of work. And I think the most important thing on this is to find a lot of, like, enough strength in you to say no to this cask. Even if it's a great distillery name, if it's a great age, it looks great, but something like Jason said in texture or something there, and you just walk away and say no. It's not easy. Because today to get, 20 years old single cask from, I don't know, Ardmore or whatever, it's given. So how would you say no? But you got to say no if you're worried about your reputation, about your, future bottlings and about your past. So getting back to your question about the ImpEx Collection, we're not trying to discover America. We're not Christopher Columbus. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just piggybacking things from people like David Stirk, like Mark Watt, like Andrew Symington, like Alex Bruce, like, Ollie Chilton, like Joshua Hatton, Jason. We're getting by a little bit. First of all, we learned what and how not to do things, how not to make mistakes. And it's always good to learn on somebody's mistakes. So thank you for that.
We'll keep making them if you keep
You're welcome.
Wow.
Yeah, so at least it costs us less. So that's number one. But by making mistakes, we'll learn. And, yes, you named, Gordon MacPhail and Cadenhead and all these independent bottlers. And they're great and, great reputation, of course. But my heart is more like Single Malts of Scotland is what, 10 years old or something? Single Cask Nation is probably not too far away from that. It's when people connect the old traditions with something that is like, for example, you have this on a bottle. This is awesome. Like, take a look. Like, who would come up with something like that? This is doesn't mean that the ImpEx Collection will have that on their back label, but it's something that to learn from or to learn about. So that's basically my short. Jason, was I talking enough, like long enough because I was quiet all the time?
Keep going. I'm loving it. Go.
Hey, Joshua, don't over-roast that potato, please. Just watch it so the dinner is good. Anyways,
Okay.
Chris?
Our house style?
Yeah.
The juice is going to be fucking cool. Like, it does run the gamut. It's like it's in different categories and whatnot, right?
Please tell me
It's
that
just
that's
gonna be
the
cool.
tagline.
Look at that.
If Sam would let me run that as a tagline, I totally would. But I don't think it's as professional as we probably should be. But anything that's bottled is it's like it's well thought out, and it's just gonna be cool. Like look at what Sam's holding up. 40-year-old malt. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Great way to start. Pull up another bottle, Sam.
Speaking of mistakes, this whiskey was distilled in 19999 year. Have you heard of it this year? It's not what 1999.
99.
Forever young, 21 years old. So good.
That's a time traveling expression.
We were buying those from Elixir Distillers, and they were trying to convince us that they said this is so y'all, and it's so good. So, okay, we're nice people, you know. All they said is good. It must be good. Who knows?
Anyways, as it expands, the Scotch whiskies will be. I think the Scotch whiskies will reflect historically what ImpEx has done, in that because ImpEx has been putting its logo onto different bottles for a while, as you know, the Evolution series and all that. But as it expands out beyond the Scotch whiskies, you know, it's going to have a classic. It's going to have a classic style, but at the same time, just be absolutely cool. And even within the Scotch whiskies, it's going to be cool. Like when you grab that bottle and you pour it for a friend, it should be a little bit of a step into something nostalgic, or even into the unknown, where you're like, let's try this and let's see where we're about to go. It should just be cool.
Very cool. I've got a question for Chanel. This one just popped into my head, so I need to make sure I parse the question correctly. But it sprang from a point that Ali made, which I thought was so interesting, and it was that there are so many different styles of independent bottling and different approaches to independent bottling. And so before joining Elixir, you were with That Boutique Whiskey Company, and I'm not looking for you to share trade secrets or anything like that, but on the face of it, That Boutique is a very different brand from Single Malts of Scotland and Port Askaig and elements of Islay. And like on the back end of it, you know, where you're part of the team that is creating the product and selling the product, was it an easy transition for you? Was moving from one independent bottler to another independent bottler an easy transition, or is even the back end sort of a different and a new way to work?
It was quite a bit different. It's quite a bit. I mean, the roles were different too, and conversations are a little bit different. I was advocacy for the States, so I was living in New York, and then coming to be closer to the core of everything when I moved to London to work for Elixir Distillers. The conversations are different. And of course, when you start, you're trying to go, okay, so that's sort of like what Boutique did. That's not quite the same, you know, and comparing a lot more. Yeah. Ethos was slightly different too, and just the way, there are so many different styles. And Julie came from SNWS as well, and I can't even imagine, you know, I don't even know how that one works.
I was going to ask about that too. Yeah.
It's amazing within a niche sort of pocket of Scotch whiskey that there are so many differences even within that. Yeah,
it's so different. Society is completely different again. Society is, apart from anything else, it's a membership-based independent bottler, so it's not widely available to everybody. It's not, so like from the get-go, that's different. But it's just as you say, it's different things that you're doing, different conversations you're having with people, different ways of introducing them to things.
Did you ever want to just shout at the rooftop, "Number 7 is Longmorn," or, you know, one of these things?
I did regularly. That's the thing. I do think it's important for people to know. So I always told people. Maybe that's Maybe I'm not one of their success stories.
And this is why you have a new job, Julie. It all makes sense.
That's it. It all falls into place after a while.
Do you think in a way it's because an independent bottler is essentially it's a business made up, normally they're smaller businesses made up of a few people, and they end up representing the personalities of both the styles of the whiskey, the personalities of the brands, of the labels, end up representing the people who are bottling them. Like you can see a change in our labels from 2001 when Sukhinder did his first horrible map label, and he doesn't stay up to 1:30, so I can say that. Or,
Is anyone recording this?
Yeah. Or the black. So I remember when I started at TWE and before I moved over to this side, they changed all the labels on the single malts of Scotland. So that was 2010, 2011, and all the labels were jet black. Right, they were jet black labels, very modern. And I was working in a shop. We couldn't tell you what was on the label because we couldn't read them. So all we had was a wall of black labels in the middle of our shop, which looked awful. So it was one of the first things I changed because I was like, that's got to go, because from work in a shop, that doesn't work. But at the time, Sukhinder hadn't worked in a shop for 20 years. So he had absolutely no concept that this was a bad problem to have, because he wasn't sitting there having to talk to customers. And like you bring up boutique and SMWS, I know a few people at SMWS, all through Julie, who are great fun. I know a few people at boutique. I've been messaging Sam Simmons for my sins for the last week. I definitely think there's an element of boutique that represents some of the people there. It seems fun. It seems completely outlandish and completely mental. We're obviously different to that. We're not fun. We had this conversation before, I think, over Black Top.
This is my interview, and you guys are reenacting my interview with him. We're not fun. Yeah. Do you want to fill it for us?
It's so not true. It's so not true.
It's just a different kind of fun. There's less in-jokes on the labels. That's the difference.
There are less in-jokes on the labels.
Well, there are some labels that have in-jokes on them, but people don't even know that. So,
so if you take us as a team, like we're a pretty small team. There's only 9 of us. Right? There's at a stretch you could say 11 if you included Sukhinder and his brother.
Yeah.
And
you're saying that just because Raj is tall?
Yeah.
Stretch?
That is stretch. He always complains I don't make any of the POS big enough for him. And I'd say that as a team, we're pretty much all, everybody is like Chanel and Julie. They're all from a whiskey background, pretty much. They all either worked in shops and or for whiskey brands, all slightly obsessive. Slightly obsessive. Chanel sitting. I was walking past her desk. You still haven't taken that bottle of Longmorn 15-year-old home. I might drink it. So do be
no.
And I think that ends up coming through in your product, and it comes through in how you present your brand. I think that's true when I look at Single Cask Nation, and I know it'll be true when I look at ImpEx. You do end up representing who you are, even unintentionally, in your products.
I think it makes a difference when people are so passionate about it, though. Like it's effortless to talk about how good a product is when it's something that you really enjoy drinking. So I think it is much easier to talk about whiskey when you really, really love whiskey. And I think you're right, Ollie. I think that comes through. I think it's evident when people don't. That it is more evident than the other side when people don't, and I think that shines through. Whereas, it's so easy for us to talk about our whiskies because, at the risk of sounding all corporate about it, they're all so good. It's
I definitely think too, being part of independent bottling or smaller companies, you're able to have more of a point of view. You're allowed to have your own point of view. It's not just the company line. And I've come from working, my first couple of brand jobs were Pernod Ricard and Bacardi, and fantastic sort of programs that they have. But I was pretty low on the food chain, and you're told what you have to say. That's kind of it. You don't deviate from that. And opening yourself up to independent bottlers and what we're able to do and the kind of life we're able to bring into it, you do end up, creating a brand almost within yourself, and the way you speak about whiskey for Elixir and for Single Cask Nation.
Well, and to that point, it always makes me wonder about, I don't want to say we always, but we often have an uphill battle to represent independent bottling. You always start from what's an independent bottler and why is it an independent bottler? And this idea that you only get knockoff casks. And yet, somebody might show up at a masterclass and listen to a brand story that was born whole cloth in a marketing boardroom. And I'm sure it's not the case for all independent bottlers everywhere. But I know for those of us in this virtual room right now, we're independent bottlers because we're passionate about the product that we put in glass. To go out and present that is exciting. And you mentioned this a moment ago, Julie, we're enthusiastic about it. And instead of us trying to come up with some highfalutin story, did my internet just go there?
No.
You're okay.
Timing.
Okay.
Yeah.
My whole screen kind of did a flash.
That is just
Sorry,
an
let me
8-bit
get back.
badass. It's cool.
Yeah, I'll just get back to my soapbox. Just give me a second. I'll find my soapbox again. So, so instead of showing up at a masterclass and having to listen to stories about Vikings, you can show up at one of our classes and we can tell you about distilleries and the people that we know at those distilleries who are producing that whiskey that you're now drinking. And I'd love to see that shift happening. If we ever want to talk about authenticity, and I know that I shouldn't get too philosophical at 9:15 on a whatever day of the week it is. Wednesday, I'm rumored to believe that. But authenticity is so important. And if you're, Aaron Krause said this in the comments a moment ago about branding. And on one hand, I agree with them. But on the other hand, it's not just branding in terms of what does your label look like and what's the name of your independent name of your independent bottling company, but it's access to the people behind that who are authentic. That to me is more important than just getting your successful label branding correct. Yeah. So authenticity is something we've championed for a full 10 years. Authenticity, transparency, enthusiasm, passion, I'd love to see those associated with independent bottlers more than buyers of knockoff casks, rebottlers of someone else's brand. So that's what I'm championing the next 10 years.
You're here, Jason.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I purposely
We're right behind you.
I know Joshua's reading the paragraph that's in the comments, and so I purposely stopped just to catch him. These are the things I do just to annoy him.
Reginald just wrote the 6th book of the Jewish Torah, which is wonderful here. It's very long. We'll have to read that later.
I thought it came from George R.R. Martin. Very quickly, before I go quiet again, I did not show the Kilchoman 4, and I did not pour the Kilchoman 4 to torture Travis. I poured it to honor Travis. And I know he's in search of it, and I can tell him when this is gone, that's the end of my Kilchoman. And the reason, partly I wanted to pour it for Travis, but then I also wanted to pour it for Sam here, because Sam was such a good champion of us getting this cask from Anthony. And I know Anthony has regretted it ever since. So thank you, Sam, for going to that for us.
Bottled the Kilchoman, did you? You bottled the Kilchoman. You did that?
I'm sure Single Malts of Scotland's done it.
Third company to do that? Third company or something?
Yeah, I think we were the first. But I don't keep. It's not about records, Ollie. It's about the liquid in the bottle.
It's not a competition.
Since you brought Kilchoman, I know we're on the independent bottler page, but I just got off the phone with Anthony and James, and they probably said they went to 7-day, 12-hour shift, 640,000 liters of pure alcohol production.
Wow.
I didn't think that I thought their capacity was 450. It's 640.
Yeah.
Wow.
So 7 days, and they basically made a shift and a half. Good. And I don't know how secretly this is, but they're buying the distillery, their own distillery in Barbados. And if I'm there tomorrow, that means that I revealed this secret.
I love it. It's not a secret now, Sam.
Yeah. Every time I tell a secret, Anthony tells me, I get death threats from the boys. I don't understand. This isn't fair.
Peter is moving to Barbados. He's going to live there. One of his sons, Peter.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. There's a development on a Wednesday night.
There you go.
That is a
So why I
development.
brought it up, I thought if they increase their production, maybe there'll be another cask for Single Cask Nation that they can, share or something like that. Make
On the
available.
phone tomorrow. On the
On-
phone tomorrow. Please place calls. Yep.
On that,
Ollie,
I'm going to drink some.
Chanel, Julie, you heard nothing.
On
No.
that, I'm going to drink some Isla whiskey because it seems appropriate, being Isla Festival week. So I'm drinking 25-year-old Isla whiskey. It's very tasty.
Yeah, I'm going to pour a little bit of this. Some Elements of Isla BW4.
Nice.
What is that? Oh, wow. Chanel, the 25-year-old. Lovely jubbly.
Joshua, I thought you were holding up Lil Bow Wow's label. No, that's not Lil Bow Wow.
Yeah, that's his fourth album, BW4.
Lil Bow Wow.
So I wanted to touch on one last question of the barrage of questions I read when we first opened up here. And Jason, I loved your point about authenticity, and I think that's always been the goal, right? We're bottling our heart and soul. We're bottling what we love. You get to see a part of us, and if we're not doing it authentically, then why are we even doing it? The concern that I have, though, is we're preaching to a very small choir, and we're always looking for new people to join that choir. And I think that one of the things that people run up against, and this is one of the things that I hear the most, and I'm sure, Julie, Ollie, Chanel, I'm sure you guys have heard this as well, is why would a distillery give you the better whiskey? If I love my Liquori 10, why am I buying Liquori 10 from you? It's got to be a lesser whiskey because they only bottle their best stuff, right? So this is something that we're constantly just pushing water uphill on. So what's your elevator pitch, right? When someone brings that to you, how do you try to convince them otherwise?
Someone else want to take this so I don't get in more trouble? I always get told off.
Oh, Chris Uhde.
Oh, Chris Uhde's in.
Everybody swears that their barbecue or their chili is the best, and everybody is wrong.
Because yours is the best? Is that?
It's relative, right? Like, it's absolutely relative. As an enthusiast, you're like, oh, it's going to be split down to the room. You have 10 expert chili makers in a room, and you have 25 people trying those 10 chilies. Everyone's going to like something different, and they're going to have their own reason for doing it.
Okay, I don't agree with that, but
in this case, though, I think, though, Chris, the example is not accurate, because in this case, you have a group of 12 people selling their chili, but they're buying their chili from someone else, and that original chili maker is also in the room.
Yeah, but you're looking at.
Is there cat food in the chili? Just asking for a friend.
Not this
Yeah,
time.
but that original chili maker might have to deal with some bean counters.
I know when I've been asked it, I mean, it takes a little bit of practice to figure out what, how it all works and how the industry works. And I've always said that basically they have their set SKUs. They have their set products that they put out. It has to taste a certain way. Not all of the stuff that they produce ends up tasting that way. Mm-hmm. So, there were times that for instance, I used to get asked that a lot. When I was at Boutique, we had a Bowmore 15-year-old. There is a Bowmore 15-year-old. It is the darkest. I think that's still going. And this was a bourbon cask. It doesn't fit into the darkest. What do they do with Bowmore 15? They're not going to just suddenly start a whole new SKU for however many casks they have of that. They've got to make money off it somehow. And I guess in that term, Ollie's sort of personification of us as the leeches of the industry kind of kicks in, where we come in and we're like, hello, we'll take that. Thank you.
I guess. So, and Julie, you have to keep me honest, because I know I get told off by your friends. So you're upsetting them later. I see it differently. I see there's a massive difference from bulk whiskey production and bulk whiskey sales to product. In fact, to the degree that those things are almost operate exclusively differently. So, and when I say product, I mean product and marketing. Right? Though, like you have your product and your marketing, that all fits together. We've made a product and we're going to market it, and it can be led by the marketeers who say we want this product, go and make it, etc., etc. But your bulk whiskey production, your making of spirit. So Anthony Wells increasing from what I figure must have been 350, 400,000 liters up to 650,000 liters. He will expect a certain change in his spirit character due to his increase in production. Now, it might not be massive. It might not even be that noticeable to most people. He's probably given himself enough leeway in his production that it's not going to change that much. But there will be a change, and it'll be very slight. But what he's doing is he's changing his production at this point because he thinks in 7-8 years' time he's going to be selling a lot more Machiavelli because Sam Filmus does an amazing job on Kilchoman in the US. So he's done his maths and he said we're going to sell a lot more whiskey in 7 or 8 years' time. But what he doesn't know is that in 7 or 8 years' time, Sam Filmus is actually going to be selling another Islay whiskey from another distillery on the south coast, and it's going to blow everyone's mind. And maybe Kilchoman sales won't be as big. So
and this is where Ollie gets in trouble.
Is this where I'm going to need to cut him off, isn't it?
You almost hear the exact moment.
We were nearly there. Yeah, we were nearly there.
I'm using this as an example, not reality. And so then, at that point, maybe Anthony's like, well, okay, I've now produced an extra 100,000 LA of spirit that I don't need. There's nothing wrong with that spirit. There's nothing bad about what he's done there. It's good spirit. It's good quality spirit. Knowing Anthony's probably put it into stunning wood. But if he planned to sell X amount in 7-8 years' time and it didn't happen, he's still got that. Now, he's an independent distillery company. He's got good investors. He can probably sit on the stock for quite a long time. But maybe, one of his investors says, look, I really need you to push the figures this year. I need some income. So he goes, okay, fine. I'll bulk sale 50,000 liters into the market, and maybe he'll change the name or whatever he does with it. Please bear in mind, I'm saying this all as a hypothetical. This won't happen with Kilchoman. But
this is not undisclosed Islay whiskey for anyone that's.
Yeah, this is exactly what happens in the industry. So you're making a plan 3, 5, 10, 15 years ahead, and you produce your whiskey, and then it doesn't sell, and then you have to move it on. Most of what we purchase, the majority of what independent bottlers purchase, is spirit made for blends, right? So it's not made for single malt. In fact, I don't think. I mean, I know that most distillery companies have plans, like they have projections and plans for their single malt brands, and it's probably more now than it did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there was no planning for single malt brands because you've got to bear in mind they didn't exist. I mean, there's this horrible thing where distillery companies claim their brand is 100 years old, and their brand was only actually created in 1995. I mean, it's a nonsense. They were making whiskey for blends. Yep. So what happens in the industry is that you're adjusting to that. There's nothing wrong with the spirit. You're making it for blend or you're making it for single malt. You might adjust your wood policy. So, Joshua, Jason, you guys know as well as we do that a lot of the stock you get offered at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it's in pretty dank wood. It's the wood's old. It's knackered because it was destined to become 3, 4-year-old rough. As you guys were talking about blends with Dr. Bill the other day on your podcast about those young blends. They are rough. They are what they are, and it's largely because the wood's pretty rubbish. That stock then gets sold off because those blends aren't selling, and then people like us turn up and we go, okay, well. Whether it's you guys cherry picking that one cask that happens to be unbelievable, and that does happen, or whether it's us going, heck it, give us all of them, and then we'll just go sort them out and wait another 10 years. That's where that comes from, and it's where the misunderstanding for consumers comes is that there's marketing companies and PR companies out there saying, well, every drop of X and X whiskey made on Islay was planned 10 years ago and laid down in this car, and we knew exactly what was going to happen to it. You had no idea what the wood was going to do to it. You didn't know. Mm-hmm. You hope for the best. You have an idea, you have a general gist that we create this spirit character and we put it into this wood and we get something like this. But there's going to be the oddballs and there's going to be the bits that aren't quite right. And as Chanel says, if you've got a brand that doesn't fit, you get rid of it. Or if your sales aren't as good as you thought they'd be, you get rid of it. And independent bottlers are the leech. We sit on the side and we take that up. We do. We suck it up.
Barnacle's nicer. Barnacle's nicer than
leeches in a good way, right?
Yeah.
Leeches used to
like the tapeworm of the
Yeah.
industry, but in a good way.
And that for me, I guess where I fall into trouble, as Judy well knows, is some distillers see that as me slagging them off, saying they don't care. They care a lot, but everything's got a purpose. Everything's got a plan.
Yeah.
And what the Scotch whisky industry is incredible at doing is when the plans don't work, they find solutions. And sometimes the solution's us, or sometimes the solution is a new product range, or sometimes the solution is to wait another 10 or 15 years. But you have to appreciate
it. Depends whether it needs a spin or not. If it doesn't need a spin, you can sell it on to someone else. If it needs a spin, then you can turn it into being something else.
I think the confusion too is that we are against the big brands, right? Or we're against the distilleries, and we're not. We actually work symbiotically with them, very much so. We're just showing what the distillery really is capable of too. If ABV and there's all this different things that they have to adhere to create a consistent brand, wasn't an option, wasn't a thing.
Sounds like you're back to my chili analogy. You can show with the beans, meat. Some people don't even use beans, but the meat tomato sauce can do.
I think the way I've always described it when I'm answering the question about, how, in what way you're different, etc. I always use the example, and I always just pick one of the big mainstream, available everywhere, core whiskies from Glenfiddich or Glenlivet or something like that. And everyone who drinks that whiskey, when they take that whiskey off the shelf, they want it to look, feel, taste, be the same as it was the last time that they had it. And the difference with independent bottlers is that if we had a whiskey from, and I'm better using Islay distilleries, so if you take Kalila as the example, the variations that you can have on Kalila, we don't have to follow that pattern. It's someone's job to make that the same all the time and make that whiskey consistent and always taste the same, whereas we're not driven by that, and we have the opportunity to allow people a completely different experience with independent bottling, because they get an opportunity to try whiskies from distilleries that, it will taste different, it will look and feel and be different to what they're used to, but it's to give that kind of more, a bigger, it's a bigger whiskey world,
So what Julie's talking about there is, if we're all enthusiasts here, and if we take off
if we all had beans
our
in
industry
our
hats and we put on our enthusiast hats, it is like one of the greatest joys in whiskey when you get an independent bottling of something and it is absolutely stellar. Yeah. And you pour it and you love it, and then you get to the end of the bottle and you realize you can't buy anymore, and it is the single biggest regret of any whiskey enthusiast when you realize, oh man, 100%. I should have bought more of that. But
then you look on auctions and see how much it's going for.
Yeah. And then what you do is you look at the glimmer of hope where you're like, that guy's usually pretty consistent. I'll just buy his next bottle. It's cool.
Yeah,
that's right.
In that way, independent bottling, and I realize I'm preaching to a group of people apart from Chanel who will not really appreciate what I'm about to say, is much the same as sport. It's about the winning and the losing and the feeling of depression when you're losing. And you follow a team. Chanel and I follow the same team. In the last 3 weeks, we have both won and lost. Very thing, and that involves a lot of emotion. But those emotions are great, whether they're bad or good, because at least you care. Which goes back.
You're alive, Ollie.
That is definitely better than
when you're standing in your sitting room, throwing the line across the room, and then realizing what you've done.
That's a quote directly from Fever Pitch. Are you an Arsenal fan?
Next podcast.
Okay, so I understand where our next step with ImpEx would go into chili pepper business, right? Is it?
And cat food.
Or beans.
Perfect.
Beans, chili pepper, and cat food.
There you go.
Yeah.
Burrito style.
It's quite a niche market.
I like Chanel's point in terms of us not competing with the distilleries, but kind of sometimes showing what this distillery can offer in terms of quality and taste, and sometimes showing the cask that it's totally different from the distillery DNA, which is great. You know, otherwise this cask would have gotten lost in their, core expression releases or ended up in some other independent bottler hands, which could be a loss of a good cask.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to this point that you brought up, Ollie, in terms of like Kilchoman increasing their production of the stuff, they still don't sell to, independent bottlers like, Joshua and Jason would be great. Like anyone else would be great to see, but that's the reason why they don't do that. However, I caught Anthony and I brought it up in today's conversation. I said, you don't sell it to independent bottlers, but you sell it to blenders. He goes, no. I said, what about Kill Hard? Kill Hard?
Yes.
But Sam, you know as well as I do, Anthony doesn't do anything until he does do it. Until he's on a
said, I'm not doing anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. That was like, I said, okay, I'm going to be looking for Kill Hard 2, Chapter 2. So that's the beauty of independent bottling. That yes, some distillers would not let us use their name or would not sell us the whiskeys, etc. But there's plenty of them, plenty of great whiskeys where we can kind of shine with other things. Yeah, Joshua, sorry.
No, don't be. Back to Chanel's. The floor recognizes Jason for 2 minutes. Go.
I was also returning to Chanel's point, and so I want to hear what you say first.
Well, I'm connecting Chanel's point to a question from Aaron Pross from earlier on that I read. So you go ahead and you do you. You do you. And then I'll get to this.
Just so very quickly, I will try and take up the 2 minutes. Is when I first got into my whiskey journey and I was learning about the brands, that was how I wanted to know what the distillery was putting out. And then after 5 years, I started looking at these knockoff merchants selling, made up Rolexes off the back of a truck down the Barras, Julie. And I'm like, why would I want the knockoff version when I can get the real deal here? And then I quickly realized, you can have this industry with both official bottlings and independent bottlings. And the thing that I always present in my tastings is we're not putting our Kilchoman up against Kilchoman's Kilchoman, our Laphroaig against Laphroaig's Laphroaig. See, that was too much for Sam. I knew I pushed it too much there. I apologize, Sam. I'm sorry. I said Kilchoman one too many times.
He's mic dropped.
He's awful.
Can I just step in there, just so everyone knows? I'd put my stuff against their stuff. We do a much better job.
What?
They just gave me
you can't say that, Ollie.
Can you mute him, Josh? Mute him.
I know. Just mute him just now.
I didn't put
Just
it
for a
live
minute.
and recorded.
He does not represent us.
These are the personal opinions of Ollie Chilton. They're not the opinions of Elixir Distillers.
You're both very well versed in saying that. That was very impressive. That's not the first time that's come up.
Yeah, we're more scared of the big boss than he is. That's what it is.
Sam's back. Behave. So the thing for me.
Oh, look at that! Glass of 73.
Cheeky. Oh, very nice.
That's my year.
There you go. The pear-shaped bottles.
Man, Manischewitz. Look at that.
Lucky man. Good pours. And so for me, I always think if we're going to come out with a Laphroaig single cask, it's worth knowing what Laphroaig 10 cask strength is doing. right? If we're going to put out a Kilchoman, it's good to know what Macker Bay is doing, or a Senegar, or what have you. Like, I like being able to present the counterpoint to the point, right? There we go. An earlier Glenglassaugh for us. And so, right, and so that to me is the point there, Chanel, where we are in this together, right? We are independent bottlers, and it's true for you only for a little bit longer, but we don't have a distillery. We're not producing liquid, right? We need the ones who are producing liquid to sell it to us. And it's wonderful when they do. It's unfortunate when they don't. And then I'll make one more point in my allotted 2 minutes, which I think I'm only about 45 seconds into. This is how time works. The thing that concerns me, Ollie, is seeing independent bottlers spring up who are taking what you talked about as bulk sales in knackered wood and putting it straight into bottles. Yeah. That's the thing that's going to undo the independent bottling side of this industry. And I think to begin with, they'll take care of their own businesses. But as they keep cropping up under new guises, I worry that that'll soften the work that we've been doing on our side of this industry.
So I cynically don't worry too much about it, because I feel that independent bottling sells to a pretty niche audience. We were having this conversation today in the office because it's really easy to get very caught up in your world, and I'm far too caught up in mine. Right, I'm obsessed with what I do. My wife will tell you I don't have a hobby, and then every now and again she looks around my office and she goes, "Oh, yeah, you just do your hobby, and it's a job." But I'm also aware that I essentially sell to people like me, right? I'm pretty sure that the people who buy the whiskies that we bottle are like me. They're a little bit sad. They spend far too much time looking at auctions. They spend far too much time looking at bottle websites. I mean, it's not normal. I know that because I meet people from outside our industry and they look at me like I'm nuts. And then you meet like normal customers and you realize that they've got a very different way of looking at a brand, looking at a whiskey. So when I think of those independent bottlers who are bottling not great stuff, all I can think is they're not going to get listed by retailers in the end. They're not going to sell and eventually they'll go bust. It's a great example of capitalism. Not a capitalist particularly, but it's a great example of how it works.
But I can agree with that part though. But what damage do they do in the interim, right? We've all talked here in the panel about how much effort we put into representing being independent bottlers. It doesn't take a lot to undo that.
But I guess my point is that you could say the same from a big company releasing a bottling that's not very good or is frankly pretty lackluster. What damage does that do to the whole category? Well, the reality is not that much, because Johnnie Walker Black is still pretty damn good, and it sells X many million cases. When someone does a bad bottling, no, it's not great for us, but most people are going to remember our bottlings because they've had some experience with Judy or they've had some experience with Chanel, and it's a really personal business. It's a really personal relationship. We are. I know that we're completely wholly reliant on Sam and Chris pushing our product and believing in it. We're so niche and so small. That's actually our strength, and it means that I don't have to worry too much that someone bottles bad stock. It's not great. It's not good. It does make a conversation more difficult, but it doesn't make all the conversations more difficult. I think the flip side of it is that the industry at large, and as it changes, this becomes more apparent, is they don't necessarily respect the symbiotic relationship that Julie pointed out and how important that is. I'm sure I've told this story before. I was speaking to a distiller a few years ago about one of their brands, and they said to us, "Look, we've got this stock. I'd really like to sell it to you, but our marketing team and lawyers are really upset because our brand's name has been used on a bottle, and they've asked, would you mind using a different name? So we did. We very kindly called our whiskey Ardvor. So we used the Gaelic translation. It's really difficult to translate. I don't know if anyone could work that out.
It's a tough one.
And I love, this is why I love the Scotch whisky industry, because in the bulk side, they was like, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. They won't find it on a Google search. You're all good. And I asked him, I said, what's the backstory? And he goes, look, the backstory is, he said, it's pretty ridiculous. I got a phone call from our legal team saying that there's a brand using our brand name, and you need to cease and desist. You need to get them to stop. And they said, fine, send me a picture of the bottle. And I said, who'd bottled it? And they said, Gordon MacPhail. And it was the distillery label, right? And you have to take into account that Gordon MacPhail had been bottling Macallan, Ardmore, Talisker. I mean, literally the biggest brands in the world. They've been bottling them for 50 years. With the distillery name in big letters, they've got an entire series on it. And that for me is more troubling.
Look at that.
Yeah, Strathisle. Yeah, exactly. These are amazing whiskeys.
Yeah.
Sam, you're opening.
Sam, you are killing me, Sam. Oh.
But, you know, they're iconic bottles. They built those brands. You know, Gordon MacPhail cannot be celebrated enough for building brands that would not exist today. And I do worry more about the fact that as distillery companies essentially bow down to marketing people who don't understand our industry, don't understand what we do. I thought you were tapping your watch there, telling me off.
I was thinking that, but I was just scratching my wrist, to be honest. But I was definitely thinking, I only got 2 minutes. This feels a wee bit longer than that. But we don't play favourites around here, I hear.
As they get more worried about that, they take the distillery names off. They make you change the names. They make it more difficult to explain to a customer where it comes from. And for me, that's more of a problem than, you know, Joe Bloggs sets up an independent bottling company and bottles Fettercairn 7-year-old from 50th refill hogsheads. You know, that guy's only going to affect maximum 300 people. And if it's a Duff cask, probably only 200. That's fantastic. The only 200 people I've got to worry about. Marketing,
but they'll go looking for better ones once they've tasted that.
You just described my nightmare whiskey. That's my nightmare cask.
Better Fettercairn, that's a long journey.
A 7-year-old better.
Yeah. what I worry about is that you end up in a situation where you want to tell people what you're doing. That's your job, is to say, this is what we found and what we've done. But because companies are worried about it, not because of the guy who bottled Fettercairn, they don't know about that. They've never seen that. They're worried about the fact that they spent all this money building a brand around Michael Owen saying Whisper, which frankly nobody in the world cared about outside of a few whiskey geeks who thought it was hilarious. They're so worried that they're going to lose all that brand equity that they bought, they made, because, you know, you guys who are fantastic at what you do bottled a really good whiskey. They don't know it tastes good. They have no idea. So that for me is a much more worrying problem. That's a much more difficult problem that we're facing.
So I worry that. Sorry, Josh. I just worry that
go ahead,
when somebody, like, say that's their first foray into independent bottling, and they try this crappy, you know, subpar whiskey, that they're going to go, in independent bottlers, we're judged. It's not judged on the distillery. It's not judged on them. It's judged on the whole category. Independent bottlers as a whole are crap. You know, I don't know if that's what
I hear you. I'm going to tell you a very quick story, and I remember this from the 90s. You're going to love this. So when Bill Clinton got into trouble with Monica Lewinsky, and all this stuff came out, as it came out, the first thing my grandmother said, why does she have to be Jewish? Because she felt as if that's what now people think of, right? And so it's the same idea, right? If you go to a shop and you maybe you're following your favorite distillery, maybe you love Kalila, and you find, Joe Schmo's bottling company, Kalila, and it's absolutely terrible. Are you going to move on to something else? Because,
firstly,
first impressions.
No, because there's a law against that. Anyone has to give up their keys and their children.
Yeah, they're not allowed to.
True.
Yeah. They're not allowed to be in charge of keys anymore.
Or children.
So listen. There's a question that Aaron Pross had asked back at 8:44 p.m. So an hour and 6 minutes ago. But everything that we've been talking about here, I think, really ties very nicely into his question. So I'm going to pop it up here. So as an IB, how do you make your bottle stand out on the shelf? What's the best way to keep someone that's never tried you want to try your bottlings as opposed to just reaching for their everyday? Is there a way to appeal to someone who's not a whiskey nerd? And this is a really great ending question. Or is it always going to be niche?
I had this conversation in a retailer today, and it was about a different label, about a different company to ours. But I was commenting on an independent bottler whose range I had tasted, and I said that everything I tasted was excellent. And they were talking about it and saying, well, how do you get people to understand that? And it's education. It comes down to education. It comes down to people like me, people like Chanel, people like Ollie, all of us, all sharing that information with people. So the more we can get out there and share it and tell people about it and let them see it, the more they'll seek it. And I think that the kind of theory behind you're as good as your last bottling stands. So when people have tasted a really good single malts of Scotland, that they've then tasted another Ben Nevis that they've come across, and they think, oh, actually they do that under single malts of Scotland as well. I'm going to taste that one because they were always really good. And it's just about keeping that at the forefront. That doesn't answer Aaron's question about how do you make it stand out on a shelf. You just put lights behind it. Put lights behind it and underneath it, and that'll make it stand
the label
out.
All black.
It is interesting because we had a conversation today in the office about the difference between, say, supermarket or like big shop brands and independent retail. And I don't think it's necessarily has to be niche, or maybe it is niche, and I just like being in that niche. But it is that, as Judy says, it's the education that essentially wins you sales. You need advocates in the shops and advocates in the bars talking about what you do, and they need to be advocates because they like what you do, and therefore you have to do really good stuff, like Judy says. You're not going to win that battle in a supermarket. So if it's a case of trying to get someone to buy the bottle just because it looks really nice on shelf, give up now. That is not what we do.
Just get lights.
Yeah, just get lights. To be honest, it's going to be a bit expensive. I'm not sure Sam's going to be really happy with our marketing budget. Spending on lights.
It's the monthly bills that add up. That's
it's a one size fits
not
all.
good for the environment as well. Bad for the environment. There's a lot of reason not to do the lights. You're never going to be able to compete with a brand on shelf that has consistency. We were going through this label today, and that was the main thing we were told by a marketeer was, look, you have no consistency in what you do, label to label. It's impossible. I just finished one of those.
It's really good. It's a decent little drinker.
It's a nice dram. Do you know what? It works really well in a Boulevardier for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Delicious.
Basically, stick Campari and things. Tastes nice.
Mr. Uhde has a point to make.
On the single cast side of things, the best way to appeal to someone who is not a whiskey nerd is you write one of 250 bottles.
I should also say that Chris and Sam have taught me an awful lot about what to write on a bottle since I started working with ImpEx. There's a lot of things that appear on bottles now that didn't used to. But yeah, that would work. Non-chill filtered. Apparently, I have to put that on a bowl.
I'll tell you, it's something else that helps a brand, and Mark Stewart Cassidy brings up an excellent point. The shop staff should be well familiarized with bottlers. Right? It's education. That's the front line.
Yep.
That really is the front line right there.
Very bottom. It's very below the line, very traditional, like way of marketing your brands with independent bottlers. It's not fancy billboards and bus stop ads. It's really quite like, here is our product, please try it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sam. Jason.
No problem. It's great. Since we have Mark Cassidy joining us today, I've seen a lot of people in this industry through my 20 plus years career. Never seen a guy like him. And Jason and Joshua, you're familiar with Mark, working for many, many years at the whiskey shop. I will never forget his small kind of a notebook. And, the guy always asks questions and always makes notes. Most knowledgeable guy when it comes to not just mainstream products, but niche products like independent bottlers. He was a walking encyclopedia. That's what I call him. Like people would come, they forget about shopping. They want to see Mark and they want to talk about him because he can talk about Lithuania, about some folk in Romania. I mean, this guy, and it all was kind of wrapped down around the whiskey. It's just amazing. Mark, we love you. I know he's a little bit of a trader. He went from San Francisco, moved to Washington, but we still feel like you're here with us.
I'll tell you what, though, Sam, speaking of, back to the earlier theme of stamps of approval, maybe 5-6 years ago or so, there was a 17-year-old Aaron for the whiskey shop selected by Mark. I didn't need to drink it. I saw his name, and that's all I needed to know. And it was a glorious, glorious cask of whiskey.
This guy will never compromise. Sorry, Joshua, for his reputation. I brought him, he was the one who would say yay or no on the single cask buy for the store. Most of the times he would say no, and I'm, come on, you're my friend, help me out, make me some money. He was really like standing by his principles and by his standards, which I love in people.
I want to bring up, Jason, if you needed to add something, please add it. There is a comment that I wanted to bring up.
I was going to bring up something, and now I forget what it was. So
okay, so ruminate on that. I think this is the comment I'm going to show, I think is a really important one because, at least from the standpoint of Single Cask Nation, this is one of the reasons that we started the independent bottling company. And so this message comes from Travis Williams. Mm-hmm. He's tried new distilleries because of independent bottlers like Single Malts of Scotland, like Single Cask Nation, like many others. Like that's another. It's just
so cool.
Yeah. It's an interesting.
But that's the tradition. That's the history. I used to take people into Sekinder's boardroom, and he's got a shelf of Taliskers, and it's all Talisker. It's Talisker bottled by G&M, largely with some Kenhead spat for it. And I remember taking she's left now because it's Diageo, so they leave every 2 years. But it was the head of marketing for Diageo UK for malts, right? And we were going around, and she said, "Oh well, I've been sent here by Nick Morgan. I've been told you guys could tell me a bit about whiskey." So I'm taking it around, and I take it to the Talisker shelf from there. This is Talisker. Yeah, these are all bottled by Gordon MacPhail. They're an independent bottler. They built your brand. You should probably, send them some flowers or something. And I kind of think that it's really easy now to think Talisker is a massive brand owned by a massive company that's really well built. But people would never have discovered Talisker if it wasn't for Gordon MacPhail. People would never have discovered any of the single malts. Single malt wasn't sold until, outside of Glenfiddich in 1956 or something. Nobody was selling single malt, but G&M were. They were selling Glengrant all around it. I mean, these brands did not exist without
Glen Talkers. I have a love of Glen Talkers because of Gordon and MacPhail.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah,
One-
that was a point I was going to make as well, was that whiskey like Glentalkers. So for me, Glentalkers and Glenburgie are just
Glenburgie.
so high up in
Glenburgie's
my
amazing.
list. But these are whiskies that would otherwise be destined for blending if it wasn't for independent bottling. They're made
Close
for.
distilleries.
Yeah, they're made for a very particular reason, and they're made for an amazing reason. And the blended whiskey that they go into and produce is fabulous. However, to have them bottled as single malts, we give people the opportunity to buy them, and then they will go and seek that out. So they'll go and seek it from different people, and it just, yeah.
So
sorry.
I think at the moment
I jumped on the Glentalkers thing. Sorry.
one of the biggest single malt names, or I guess again very niche, but one of the biggest single malt names that seems to be growing is Ben Nevis. Right? Ben Nevis is growing and growing in popularity. Like 1.3 million liters of alcohol from that distillery goes to Japan to become blended Japanese whiskey. So you have to put into context. A large proportion of their production is never destined to become Scotch whiskey. It's destined to become Japanese whiskey.
It's not even destined to become a single malt. It's not even destined to be. Yeah.
So and if it wasn't, and if it's not, it's compounded even worse because the distillery bottlings, which are wonderful, they are wonderful. If I don't know if you get them in the US, but 10-year-old is magnificent. 10-year-old cask strength is magnificent. You should buy them. They are wonderful whiskies. But apart from the fact they don't have enough stock to supply anyone, the packaging's terrible. Nobody thinks it's any good because it looks really old hat. So no one buys it. Yet independent bottlers, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, we all came into that parcel in 1996, 1997. It was a massive parcel of Ben Nevis, and it was bottle after bottle, and everyone was tropical fruit. And suddenly everyone's like, Ben Nevis is the best. Well, yeah.
There we go. Yep.
Andrew Simonson is always ahead of the fucking game.
There we go.
Oh,
Julie.
I'm not getting it right.
Yeah.
There you go. That's what I'm drinking right now.
Lovely jubbly. Look at that.
Which one do you like, Julie? It's the 1996, right?
Yeah.
Ollie, to what you were saying before about Chris and Sam trying to sell your brand and your single malt, of Scotland. This one doesn't need any push. What we do, we just take, and Joshua knows, we just take your name off, so we don't mention your name. That's our secret. And then we put, Chanel with her white smile, and who would say no to her, like they would buy. And we put Julie behind. Like last time, she was able to sell 45 years old Port Askaig, 3 bottles, Julie, and then three bottles of 18 years old, the single cask US exclusive. So
it's not a tough sell, Sam.
I know.
It's not a tough sell.
But I was going to mention one more thing because it looks like we're getting close to the end. Highland Park is one of my best, like one of my favorite distilleries, Highland Park. And this bottle I want to show. It's really not the 19 or whatever we had 18 years old. This is 13 years old. This is absolutely stunning. And I tried it and I just said, I love it. And of course, next thing I turn around, you see Mr. Hatton brings me this bottle. So just thank you guys for that. Appreciate that.
Sam, I have to say that when this comes in full bottle form, we have a bottle of this for you as well, because this is the big brother of what you just held up there. We cannot wait to release this.
Wow. Okay. I'll wait patiently.
You did say that there was other people on the screen, didn't you, Jason? Just when you're giving out full bottles of stuff.
I'm hearing noise. Are you hearing noise, Jason?
I'm sure it's coming from Glasgow. I'm not 100%.
So is that next whiskey.
So I want to pull this one for all of you guys and for what you're doing. I know it's not easy. It's on this side where everyone enjoys it. Everyone gets, high and all this stuff, but there's a lot of sweat and work behind this. So to you all.
Cheers indeed.
Cheers. And And someone else wants to say cheers really quickly. Look at who's
Right.
with right now.
Oh,
Mark Watt. Look at that.
He just got in from a pub somewhere. Like,
He's up
welcome,
late.
Mark. He got home
Mark,
safely. Eh?
you owe me $5. I mentioned your name among good independent bottlers, so please, I accept checks.
Yep. I quote Mark all the time, and we've used the language over the course of the night about being the leech, but having a symbiotic relationship. And it was Mark Watt who said, in times of boom, we're the pain in the arse of the whiskey industry, and in lean times, we're the best friend of the industry. And I carry that with me every day. And as this boom continues, I'm getting ready. I'm getting my money together.
I'm glad that's the language you took from Mark Watt and not what I thought you were going to say. We're past the watershed. It'll be okay.
There's a lot of language we could be taking from Mark Watt. You chose the right one for the vintage.
And Mark, please let Stuart know his name was mentioned. He owes me $3.
Apparently he sent you 10.
His spidey sense is tingling in Campbelltown.
Which was easy given the current exchange rate. But, so we are officially past time here. We're 5 minutes past. But this is our last episode, event, whatever it is, of this series. So if you have a closing remark, anything you want to say about independent bottlers, of course, I knew Jason would raise his hand immediately. Now's your chance to make it. Jason, the floor is yours for the next 7 years, apparently.
The only reason I raise it in conclusion is because the Aaron question never came back to me. So I'm just going to use this time to answer the Aaron question. No, it was just very, very simply. At the end of that, when Aaron says, will it ever not be a niche? I hope not. I hope we continue to operate within a very well developed, very well built, very well supported niche of this much larger industry. And so the fact that we get to hang out with friends in an independent bottling panel, the fact that Chanel can come from Boutique and Julie can come from SNWS, the fact that Mark Watt can wander in, right? It's so brilliant. And to have all these people as friends within this industry is very cool. So I hope the niche aspect continues. I just hope the pushing water uphill at least freezes and makes it a little easier to push.
That's a good sentiment. Look at that.
I would definitely echo everything that you just said, Jason. I think that Mark chiming in is great timing because it's a great example of what I love most about independent bottling. But I think independent companies within Scotch whisky more than anything. Obviously we've mentioned Kilchoman quite a lot, and you guys are bringing in Ardnamurchan, ImpEx bringing Ardnamurchan, and hopefully Adelphi in the future. I was on the phone to Alex Bruce literally last week about boilers, and it's such a wonderful industry that you can pick up the phone, you can phone someone who's your competitor and say, can you help me with this? Or when you're going into the US for the first time, like we were 3-4 years ago, I phoned Anthony Wills and he's like, yeah, you want to go with ImpEx because they're really, really good. And I said to him, look, I've got an Isla whiskey brand. Is that a problem? He says, no, not for me. I'm happy as long as you're happy. And I think that's true for me among all the kind of independent sector. I did a panel show tasting, not sure what it was, with Mark and David Stirk and Ewan Mitchell from Aaron just last week. I'm pretty sure that was their tasting, but we definitely drank a lot.
That's a motley crew right there.
Yeah, and I think there's something really lovely about that side of it, and the fact that it's so friendly. And I want to thank Joshua for putting on all these events so I could stay up late and drink with people. Didn't even have to watch a film for this.
There you go. I'll raise a glass to that.
Total Recall. Who would pick Total Recall?
Me.
Yes, thank you, Chanel.
My favorite movie ever. The original, obviously.
The original, yes.
This is taking a controversial turn at the very, very
ever produced.
Chanel, You and I will need. We need to have a powwow on this because I'm with you, and Ollie, I think you may be with us on the Total Recall.
I mean, I enjoyed Total Recall. I enjoyed that night particularly. I'm not going to lie. If you've not paid your $10 that I pay every month to Josh and Jason to watch our fantastic adventure through Total Recall, do it now.
There's advertising. Who needs marketing, Ollie? Who needs marketing?
You know my views.
Everybody, this has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. I think this was the perfect way to end the series. Oh my gosh, look at this. Hold on, this is perfect.
I mean, that is a great movie. That is a great movie. You're right. You're right. But it's still Arnie. It's got to be Arnie for me.
Anyway, this has been absolutely brilliant, and I've been enjoying this series. But truth be told, and it may not be too much of a secret, I've been looking forward to this particular event, to drink with you all, to talk about my favorite subject, which is independently bottled whiskey. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for staying up. Thanks to everybody who's watched, who's not just this episode or event, but all of the other ones. And I'm going to end the broadcast now. And Sam, if you need me to revitalize this, make a 3.0 series, we can talk about that at a later date. Something tells me you're going to want me to do that.
Yeah, please don't relax because you know me, I'm not going to let you. So I already have 2 ideas, not 1 but 2. So be prepared, my friend.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Joshua, because the ideas that come from me or Chris, you kind of executed the best way possible, and we enjoy being here, and I'm pretty sure people who join us are enjoying that too. And I know it's not easy to put everything together, to get Ollie, Chanel, Julia, Chris, myself, and Mr. Yellin all together in the same room. That takes a lot of Mr. Hatton job. So we do appreciate that. I'm pretty sure I speak for myself and Chris on this. So thank you, but be prepared. Do not relax. Cheers.
I will cheers to that, and I will say, Sam, I hope one of these ideas is all of us in your office popping corks. I hope that's one of the ideas, because we're all in on that.
You're welcome, but my idea was for Mr. Hatton to dance a little bit of ballet dance, this next. I'm working on it.
I might do a ballet over twerking.
Just on that. And I want you to feel secure in this. I've had my vaccine, so I can come to your office anytime you're ready. I'm there.
Well, I know you will appreciate a few bottles so much, like this one, let's say, or some up. So, welcome.
Looks like them new shelves are paying off. We're getting even more expensive, one of the two.
This is brilliant.
Cheers, Hatton. Cheers, ImpEx.
Cheers to everyone. Cheers, Sam, Chris, everyone at Elixir, to the viewers. Thank you all so much. And
cheers all.
Cheers.
Bye.